What's going on? My name is Joe. I practice talking on the internet and I hope you're doing well. I was sick for a week. So I haven't really been streaming or doing much of content, but this is the first day in a bit that I felt pretty good. So I'm going to kind of use this as a little bit of a recap and also talk about something. First things first, I was in Seattle for a debate. If that is something that interests you, the VOD is online. The comments are pretty mean, bunch of real big old meanies in there. But overall, it was a fun experience. Brad, Hannah, and Dave were lovely. Decent conversation. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the format, we couldn't delve into things in a much wider detail because there were portions that I would have loved to talk to any three of them individually about. I think we can get probably a lot more patched out given just personal time and devices, but obviously there's only so much you can do in terms of a debate where things are structured, where each speaker is going back and forth in intervals of 2 minutes, a minute and 30 seconds, but it was good. So that's going to be in the description if you want to watch it. It's a little bit of a long one, about two and a half hours, give or take, but it moves at a pretty decent clip. And I want to also thank Stardust and Vaheem for coming through with that, and also Brandon Straka and the whole Walkaway team for putting that together and doing that thing. It was a pretty fun experience. And they were, as far as guests, or sorry, as hosts to us being guests, they were incredible. Very good stuff in terms of how I was treated and how the other individuals of the event were treated. So I know that was something that even people in my community were kind of worried and skeptical about, but I can happily report that it went very well, and it was organized very well. I was treated well, and everybody was handled very, very, very well. And also just remember, I'll double check if that check clears after saying that. I'm just kidding. It was totally fine. Anyway, first things first, Patreon. For $5, $7, or $10 a month, you can submit a commission video. At $5, you get one. At $7, you get one per month, and then at $10, you get as many as you would like. And then I would also like to thank Jane, Marking, Maru, Frackle, Liberation, Valentine, and Michael for their patronage. I deeply appreciate that. We got to talk about minority Republicans.
The railroad tracks divided the town by race. I was the proud daughter of Indian immigrants. Not black, not white. I was different. But my mom would always say, your job is not to focus on the differences, but the similarities. And my parents reminded me and my siblings every day how blessed we were to live in America. Some look at our past as evidence that America's founding principles are bad. They say the promise of freedom is just made up. Some think our ideas are not just wrong, but racist and evil. Nothing could be further from the truth. I have seen evil. In China, they commit genocide. In Iran, they murder their own people for challenging the government.
Anywho, this is Nikki Haley's presidential video announcement, strong and proud, because she's going to run strongly and proudly into defeat in the Republican primary. I guess she just kind of wants a cabinet position, because that seems to be the play. Like, if you don't think you're going to win, but you want to be in the White House, then just run for a cabinet position. And unfortunately, by running for a cabinet position, the way you do that is you got to run for office. Anyway, yeah, we got to talk about minority Republicans and non-white Republicans and kind of the game that's being played a little bit, because it's being played a little bit differently than I think people kind of understand what's happening. And we got to kind of just like clarify a few things. And here's like the first clarification. Any black person can run a Republican ticket. Any non-white person can run a Republican ticket. There's just some sacrifices you're going to have to do within running for that Republican ticket. Within a Republican ticket, especially if you're doing some like mainstream stuff. And like here's the first thing. Like, I've talked about this a bit on the Prime Kai's panel from time to time when it comes up, but so like if you've heard me talk in that space, it doesn't change. But essentially, your race can only matter as far as a cute story that has to connect some way to conservative principles and values. It can never, ever, ever, ever be something as far as a means of policy or as a means of change. Even if we take Nikki Haley's video as an example, right?
The railroad tracks divided the town by race.
She can say that because it's probably factual, and there's probably data to back that up. The issue with that is nothing within her politics can have anything about eliminating those types of situations that exist all over America, where railroad tracks explicitly divided people by virtue of their race. Like, you can't have any type of policy that's racialized in such a way, or advocacy of the policy that's racialized in such a way that involves for me running, I want to change this. Like, because of my cute story about segregation in my community, that cute story about segregation can't lead to a reason why I care very strongly about this as policy. It doesn't exist. Basically, what you can do and way you got to reframe it is that you have to take your relationship to race and connect it with just conservatism. And that's where it starts and ends. You can't have anything about policy. You can't have anything about racialized policy towards the particular group that you identify as. So if you're black, you can't talk about black people. You can talk about how you experience things because you were black, but then it has to connect to conservatism, like, and how, and like just the general sort of tenets of conservatism, which is meritocracy, like rugged individualism, strong family values, and a connection to the church. Like, those are kind of like four of many that exist, but those are kind of like the big four that jumped to my mind as of right now. But those things, if you can connect your race and how it connects to those four things, then you'll easily get people to vote for you as a conservative. Look at Tim Scott and Herschel Walker. Like, it's just kind of how it is. But you're never going to be able to advocate for policies that directly help black people or directly benefit black people explicitly. You're going to always have to sort of like toe that line of rugged individualism and sort of like pseudo colorblindness in order to like get essentially white people to vote for you. And especially if we recognize that black Americans are a captured electorate in the United States, in a lot of situations, you don't have to cater to those groups anyway. So if you are a black conservative, you don't have to cater to the black people. You don't need them. And like, they're not even a large enough portion of your electorate that's where it's going to matter where you find yourself in if you're running on a Republican ticket. So you're going to have to predominantly, if you are in a red state running as a Republican, do whatever you can that can appeal to white voters. So what that's going to look like is that you can make your race part of a pretty story, but you can't make your race part of like why you care about politics. So that allows for non-white Republicans and black Republicans in particular to talk about race in a way that sometimes I don't even think liberals are prepared for. So like, they're able to just make concessions that certain white Republicans can't. So like, they'll say that, yeah, systemic racism is real. Like, I experienced racism as a black person, or as in Nikki Haley's case, a very, very rich Indian woman. And make no mistake, Nikki Haley is rich. A very quick search of her family life and history, it's like, oh yeah, like the caste system still is real, and generational assets are still real. So yeah, a Punjabi family immigrating to the United States, doing well in America, color me shocked. So like assets are still a thing in regards to Nikki Haley, but that's like a whole other sidebar. But basically, like yeah, like just but again, like even by virtue of your assets, you can still experience racial discrimination where you find yourself. But again, like that discrimination that you experienced can't relate in any way to your politic. It just doesn't. It can't exist in the Republican mindset. But you can like talk about how you have a strong family. You can talk about how like you worked hard and all, and, like you put your head to the whatever, and you grinded. Like all that stuff works if you're a non-white candidate looking to run for office. But again, to kind of like continue setting this point, you can't have some type of like racial conscious policy prescription. So you're not going to be able to do anything about like talking about the funding disparities that exist in healthcare and education, where you find Black Americans, for example, or non-white Americans in particular. You can't talk about how the criminal justice system is predatory towards non-white people, and like the school to prison pipeline. Those are things that can't exist in your policy. You can't talk about like, you can talk about crime. Well, you're more than happy to talk about crime and how it affects communities, but you can't talk about crime in a way of like the determinants of crime and why Black bodies are very sensitive and susceptible to falling into the determinants of crime. Like you can't talk about that. You can talk about crime and how Black people pew 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 each other, but that's where it kind of starts and ends. And it's unfortunate because basically what you'll have is you'll have non-white candidates, Black candidates in particular, who are able to talk about race publicly, who are able to talk about discrimination publicly, but then it has their policy around those things. There's no policy around those things. It's just like the same sort of conservative nonsense, which I guess is advantageous if you are looking to run for office, or you're able to talk freely in a particular way. So like you can talk about your personal experience, you can talk about your cute little stories about how the white kids picked on you when you were growing up, but then you can't like do anything in terms of like systemic change and systemic redress to the injustice that not only you but other Black people experienced. It's an unfortunate set of affairs. What do we do about it? I'm not too sure yet. I don't necessarily think that there is anything of alarm, quote unquote. Like we're just going to see more non-white Republicans running in red states and they're going to win. We saw that in the past election cycle where a bunch of non-white candidates were just blasting Trump supported candidates. And I think it's just going to be a commonplace where I think Republicans broadly, if I were to make any type of like prediction, I think we're going to see Republicans get more and more ethnically diverse, but we're not going to see that ethnic diversity lead to any type of new policy around injustices that marginalized communities face. Like it's basically just like a superficial thing. And there's like some polling that brought up in an article that is kind of like tangentially linked to what I'm talking about now. That basically shows like, yeah, like even racist white voters will vote for Black people if you put a shitty enough white person in front of them. The article within that I'm talking about, that I'm alluding to, is in the conversation. Republican, and it's called "Republicans Are Trying to Build a Multiracial Right. Will it work?" And the answer is yeah, generally speaking, in my opinion. But basically what you're going to have is a sort of neutralization of racialized redress. So that's going to come at the expense of it. But again, like Republicans weren't down for racialized redress anyway. So it's like, kind of who cares? I think, however, if we're looking at something long term, I think you do need to, if you are like a Democrat, you're going to have to really just like actually recognize that marginalized people have problems, and you're going to have to like really like approach these things in a targeted manner. because we do, there is sort of like a connection with like Democrat disenfranchisement. There's like a recognition of Democrat disenfranchisement, and that disenfranchisement is leading non-white Democrat voters to sort of like shift away, whether it be to the Republican Party or just kind of trying to build a separate power structure within themselves. Which, again, like the two-party system is whack, so I get it, but at the same time, like assets are what's gonna win elections, and marginalized people don't have assets. Black people don't have the type of assets needed to compete against the Democrat establishment and the Republican establishment. We just don't have the assets to do that, and we don't have the assets to advocate policy to like push things that we know will help people of our own communities. So then what we're kind of stuck with is like hoping for liberals to finally get it, and then we get something. But then that requires liberals to have like liberals and mainstream Democrats have like an acknowledgement of these problems. And by and large, they see them, but they don't want to do any type of policy unless it involves like bringing Republicans on. And Republicans will only go as far as Republicans want to go. So in reality, you're going to see this level of just like incrementalism is going to go absolutely nowhere. But in short, yeah, like we're going to see more non-white Republicans. We're going to see more non-white conservatives, and I don't think there's really much we can do about it. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing either. I think it's just going to be the natural shifts, just like evolution of the Republican Party. But it should be something like we're going to say like, hey, there's something that could be done. It's like Democrats have to start taking their electric seriously and not falling for like the buzz issue that liberals want to hear about. Like you didn't have to make 2022 about abortion. You could have just told all those abortion voters to shut up, and they're going to vote for you anyway. Like the same game that they do for black people. Like you don't need to talk about black issues for black people to vote for you in the Democrat Party. That needs to change, but it's funny how like for abortion voters, they got that. Like they got that, yeah, you're going to have to talk about this. Where in reality, I think that like abortion voters need to be treated the same way that black people are treated, and black people need to be treated the way that single issue abortion voters were treated. But that's a whole other thing. But yeah, so like you're gonna see if there's anything that I kind of want to get you kind of hip on is that you're gonna see Republicans that are non-white that have some level of racial consciousness about their identity, and they'll be able to talk their identity in such a way, but then they're going to tie it back to conservative principles and conservative values. And that's just kind of going to be the thing. If you see a non-white candidate running for a big political ticket, whether it be president or otherwise, they'll be able to talk about race, but they're going to do the same sort of denial that white Republicans do, but at least the non-white Republican will be able to talk about race a little bit. But in the end, they're just politically worthless. But again, like they'll be able to galvanize people within the Republican Party, but I mean, like it's a road to nowhere. But yeah, so in short, we're going to see more non-white people running for office. We're going to see a more ethnically and racially diverse Republican Party, especially at like the local levels. And maybe it'll start bleeding over into the Fed, but it's not necessarily something that we should be like Pikachu facing about. We kind of just knew that this is sort of like the logical progression of the party. Like as long as you can talk about race, but then use that to connect back into conservatism, then you're going to be totally fine. And what I really would like to do is connect this video back into my Patreon. So if you want more videos about just political and social stuff, feel free to donate 5, 7, or 10 to be one of the growing group of people of support. I'm also on Twitch, twitch.tv/Joe Lewis with Joe is with 2 O's, and we're back on the grind. But hey, I want to thank everybody again who showed support from the walkaway debate. And those of you who show support on the Twitch channel as well, you guys obviously are one of the leaders of the league in terms of support. So I deeply appreciate that. But anyway, we'll back up with another video a bit tomorrow. We got to talk about that That's Scott Adams stuff. So that's a thing. But either way, have a great weekend, depending on where you see this, or day, or where day, night, when you see this. If you see this when I put it up, hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and take care.